Welcome to the Regen South Conference, Shaping the Success of Central South UK. A warm welcome to you all. It's great to see so many of you here today in these difficult times. My name is Tim Hancock, and I'm Executive Chairman of Planning Design Environmental Consultancy Terence O'Rourke. But I'm here today in my capacity as Chairman of Business South, Regeneration South Business-Led Action Group, that supports major development schemes and promotes our region as a great place to invest. First of all, I'd like to say a big thank you to our sponsors for today's events. They are Coffee Mew, Winchester City Council, White Young Green, Wilmot Dixon, Southampton City Council, and BECG. Without their support today, this event wouldn't be possible, so a big thank you to them. Just a couple of housekeeping points before I begin. Could I ask you all to keep your cameras and audios off during the conference unless you are presenting? And please use the question function for questions for our panel. We're delighted to answer those as we go through the day. You can also vote for the questions you would like to be asked to push them up in terms of priorities. Please also note that this event is being recorded. Right, well, the aim of Regeneration South is to try and encourage more businesses to get involved with shaping the economic vision for the region's future and tackling some of the key challenges that we face through the geographical fragmentation of local government and LEP boundaries. Put simply, Regen South believes that there's a great deal to gain from businesses, the LEPs, MPs and local councillors working together to promote the Central South region as a whole. Many areas want to promote their particular area, but as we've seen from the success of other regional initiatives in the UK, collaboration is key. The theme for today's 6th Regenerate South Conference is Shaping the Success of Central South UK. I really believe the Central South region is currently at a crucial point. Some great work has been undertaken to date by Business South, the Southern Policy Centre and Hampshire County Council to develop this initiative. Sadly, the scheduled launch of MIPIM earlier this year had to be cancelled, but we do intend to launch Central South at MIPIM in June 2021. Now more than ever, it's vital that the momentum gained in recent months around the Central South initiative is not lost in the wake of the pandemic. Decisions made over the coming months and years will shape the success of our region for decades to come. Regen South and its associated working groups have been meeting more than ever since March to share experiences across the region, helping to keep key projects moving and to liaise with local authorities and the LEPs on developing their economic recovery plans. Today's conference provides a great opportunity to hear from some of the leading players about their ambitions for the Central South region. We have a great lineup of speakers who will talk about a number of key themes on our agenda today. These include, firstly, developing a vision and brand for our region. Unlike many other regions in the UK, the Central South sits within a policy vacuum. The government actually has no policy statement setting out its aims for the Central South region. While the LEPs and local authorities have their own strategies for their respective areas, which includes many common and overlapping themes, there is no single cohesive vision statement for the Central South as a whole. The work of Business South and Hampshire County Council have made good progress to start to define the common elements of identity, distinctiveness and place to assist this process. We need to build on this work to better define and articulate a vision for the Central South. John Till will provide us with an update on the Hampshire Place story so far on the first item of our agenda and the excellent progress being made to develop a strong brand and identity, which I believe could provide a shared vision for the wider region. Secondly, communicating the vision and ensuring a collaborative approach. There remains a need, once we've identified our vision, to clearly communicate it and get it shared amongst key stakeholders in the region. The starting point should be a broad economic and social environmental goals, and once these are established, it will be easier for housing and infrastructure to be planned in support of these wider aims. For the Central South to continue to attract and retain the best companies and talent to compete on an international stage, it needs to have more organisations from both the public and private sector collaborating, which with remits across the whole region. Robin Shepherd of Barton Wellmore will provide an update on the Central South Initiative and how we can leverage and focus our assets to further the growth of the region. Thirdly, embracing the new normal. Significant changes to the ways that people live and work in the post-COVID era have the potential to create growth opportunities in the Central South. Increased homeworking and moves towards hub and spoke office models could enable more people to work and live in our region. The planning of new communities such as Fawley Waterside Maritime City is already embracing the coming change, the long-term legacy of the virus. It's therefore an ideal time to hear from Lucian Cook and Lucy Greenwood of Savills about the impact of the pandemic on the residential market and identify some trends for the future. Fourthly, investing in our natural assets. Investment in the region's world-class natural capital, such as the national parks, AONBs, coast and heritage, is fundamental to making the Central South an attractive place for people to live, work and visit. Local councils are setting ambitious carbon emission targets that go above and beyond national policies and are starting to put in place plans and strategies that support the achievement of biodiversity net gain. I think during the pandemic, appreciation of nature has probably been more important than ever. The founder of the National Park Cities, Daniel Raven Ellison, will be giving us a talk on building and planning with empathy for the environment. Fifthly, revitalising our town centres. While much of the focus on new development in the Central South has been on new housing, this cannot be delivered in isolation. Vibrant, inviting town centres are key to attracting and retaining residents and visitors. With high street retail and long-term decline, investment is needed to reinvent the Central South towns and city centres, including Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole, Portsmouth, Southampton and Winchester, so that they support more diverse mixes of retail, leisure, cultural and community uses alongside welcoming public spaces. I will be hosting a panel discussion for an update from key stakeholders on what the future looks like around the region for them, including Kate Martin from Southampton City Council, Natasha McIntyre Hall from Portsmouth City Council, Councillor Phil Broadhead from Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council, Chaz Bradfield from Winchester City Council, and from an environmental perspective, Debbie Tan from the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Trust. As a context for that panel discussion, we will hear about a great case study in Bath of how we can revitalise our town centres with Rob Delis of Stride to Ground. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, John Till, Founding Director of Thinking Place. John has directed the development of over 70 place brands across the UK. He is active in promoting and implementing this best practice approach of creating a shared place story, widening place leadership and creating active collaborators as a key part of a place's recovery and reset in the light of the virus. John has been working with places to help them develop their response to the Towns Deal, Future High Streets Fund and Heritage Action Zones. He has led projects for places as diverse as Hampshire, Nottingham, Surrey, Harrogate, Lowestoft, Harlow, Lancaster, Doncaster, Lancashire, Staffordshire, St Helens and all three of the UK cities of culture. There's probably nobody better placed than John to be talking about place. Over to you, John.
Thanks very much, Ted, and thank you for the introduction. And it's great to be with you all today, even if only virtually. So yes, I've spent the last 14 years wandering around the UK and the island of Ireland with a team of people, helping places really reimagine themselves. And just to touch on what Tim was saying there, at the moment for place, it is absolutely critical that you have a clear direction of travel, that you widen place leadership in creating that, create more collaboration, not just in crisis, but proactively, and that you make the absolute most of the assets you've got. And that lies behind the work that we've been doing with Hampshire. So we'll share screen now. And there we go. So this has been, underpinning this has been a really massive piece of engagement in terms of developing the story of Hampshire. And we're not quite there with all of it yet. But what I wanted to do in this very quick session is give you a flavour of the findings, to have a look at what a couple of other places are doing with this, and then just to talk a little bit about where we are with Hampshire on this one. The key bit, I think, that when you look at anything like this in terms of place is, if you are a business, if you are a local authority within the area, why would you use Hampshire? And ultimately, it has to be about added value. If Hampshire is not providing added value or additionality, it isn't going to be used. And it's going to be used dependent on the audience it's talking to. Of course, Winchester, Southampton, etc. are going to have their own conversation with their own audiences. But at times it is important to be part of a bigger story, to have that scale, and to be part of the Hampshire brand quality. So what we did was a huge amount of engagement, as I've touched on. And what I want to do is just go through a very little bit of this. I think the important bit is that whatever we did in terms of engagement, however we did it, it was repeated. So it is incredibly robust in terms of what it's trying to say. So we asked people to start with to describe Hampshire, and we start with the positives, although whether it being comfortable is a positive, I'm not so sure, and maybe we'll come back to that. But we've got a place here that's prosperous, it's got virtually everything, it's a global gateway, and it has that unique combination of maritime, rural and tech. And of course, where there are positives, there are negatives. The assets of the place, be they places or businesses or sectors, not joined up as well as they could be. The identity's not there. And look at those bits at the bottom. Not a place with dynamism and not a place that is hungry. And in some of these things, you'll say, well, we know some of these, and I'm not suggesting that I'm going to tell you anything that you don't know. The important bit is how it's packaged and how we move forward with it, with this evidence and this knowledge. So we asked the stakeholders what they saw as the challenges, and look at the top three. Lack of ambition there, not a burning platform, so there's no sense of urgency. Because the place generally is successful, it's been doing well, and that means that does breed an element of complacency and a little bit of a lack of leadership. And when we look at the bottom right of that slide, not many challenges and it's fine as it is. Well, I would urge that there needs to perhaps be a little bit more urgency around that. So we also asked the stakeholders from an external perspective, when they speak to people outside of the region and they talk about Hampshire, what do they say? Well, most of it, they haven't got a clue what it's about, what it's for, or even necessarily where it is. They get as far as it's part of that very affluent southeast, bit leafy, bit sleepy, bit posh. Well, obviously, if we're building a 21st century economy, we need to get a bit past that in terms of the narrative. And what we did as well is we gave them some words and asked them whether Hampshire was or wasn't these things. So you're going to see some yes, no, don't know percentages here. And we've highlighted the big ones in red. So it is viewed as a very welcoming place, pretty cultural, very traditional. But again, look at that, not ambitious, but a very good place to live, but very complacent and not dynamic. However, a good place to visit, a good place to do business, and a good place to grow a family. And they're really good things to have. Skilled and well connected. But if you look at some of those numbers just on there, not as high as we'd like to be, probably on things like innovation and how the place is respected. But generally, great building blocks there in terms of how the place is scoring and being seen. So out of all of the evidence base, and as I say, I've just shown you a very small amount, what do we take that's important from that? Well, first of all, if we look at a stripped back map of the place, we see a place with great location. We see a place of rurality and coast. We see a place with a strong relationship to London, with wonderful Greenland. You know, we've got 2 national parks. We have coastal areas, we have cities, we have, as I say, connectivity. So in terms of a place and its location and its asset base, very, very strong. And out of that, what's important bit, we have a place that is really has been built around the land, sea and air. And it has so many stories around that it could tell better. You know, whether that's around aerospace, marine, maritime innovation, whether that's about the universities, the research that's going on, the food and drink. But it needs that urgency and dynamism, and it needs to understand as well that being affluent and successful is not necessarily a bad thing. It's how you present that. And there are some real biggies here in terms of the place and what it can talk about. It can talk about being very well connected. It can talk about being well heeled. Just look at some of the brands that are here, some of the operations that are here, some of the things that people would aspire to be part of and enjoy. And it's a place that's working well. The really interesting bit about this is how strong that slide is, but how generally invisible business and commerce is, because it's hidden in all that glorious woodland and rurality. You don't see it. It isn't about massive industrial estates and big business parks. It's about ingenuity, it's about invention, it's about talent. So what's critical with this approach that we're taking and we're looking at is about being place-led, not organisation-led. So this is not about the council. It never has been. It's a shared endeavour and it will be a shared story. It will be your story to tell. And how well you tell it will be all down to the success that it has. And it is about those things that I've talked about of leadership, collaboration, but most of all, it is about harnessing your passion for your place, because no one sells it better than you, because it's yours. So if we have a little look at a couple of places, you may have gathered from my dulcet tones that I am actually a Lancastrian. So I'm sat in my county, and my county, God bless it, along the way, has been pre-fragmented. It's managed to have bits of it fighting other bits of it. It's not come together very well. It's not joined up the assets very well. But in the last few years, that has been changing. And here we see the results of some of that change. We see Lancashire managing to be at MIPIM. You know, that's already been referred to by Tim, the biggest property event in the world. And, you know, 3 or 4 years ago, it felt a tough ask to get Lancashire to be there, supported by all the places. But the places recognise that at times you need that scale. It needs to be about Lancashire. And what they've also done is mobilise their ambassadors, not just the celebrity ones like Fred, but all of the businesses and etc. across the place, to a point where they've actually just bid for UK City of Culture, even though they're not a city. That takes some confidence. And then Coventry and Warwickshire. I say an 8-year relationship with them when we did some work with investors and key individuals in the city, and we asked them to talk about Coventry. They talked about Blitz, bombing, concrete, Lady Godiva, and they used to make cars. Well, again, We're not going to build a 21st century economy on that. One of the most important cities in the Midlands. So what it's done is taken that story and it's taken it to London. It's taken it to those people. And this is their showcase event in the Shard with government, with media, with developers, with investors. And that confidence has flowed through to them not only bidding for UK City of Culture, but winning it for 2021, which is a massive, massive achievement for the place. So if we move on to Hampshire, so you have got so much going for you as a place of significance and so many assets. And as we look at recovery and reset, this is going to be very important, this approach, being place-led, a focus on retention of business and jobs, as well as creating them, making the most of the assets that we've touched on, just some of those, getting that collaboration going. So where we've got to is there is a written narrative just about there. We have a visual way of telling that. We have some photography that tells that story. It'll all come together in a wonderful story book and toolkit. We have an emerging place leadership group, and there will be an opportunity for your involvement through the ambassador program. And the first meeting of that will be in February. So look out for that. And I just wanted to show some of the things that are emerging out of this and which are going to be available free and there to help people tell this story. And we know that a picture paints 1,000 words. And most of the places we go to show us all sorts of wonderful calendar photography on perfect days with blue skies, and we've swept all the people out of the way because they're making a mess of the shot. Well, what we want to do is we want some photography that illustrates this story and that shows the place being used, that shows the place experience, that highlights those business success stories, that highlights the talent, the intellect, the intelligence, and the business acumen that there is across the place. Because as I say, a lot of this is unseen and unknown and a little bit hidden. Well, we want to get it out there full front in front of the key audiences that it needs to talk to. And that's everything from commerce to the leisure offer. And as I said, that is all coming together in a storybook for the place. And I can just show you a couple of spreads from that emerging storybook, which is very much about completely transforming people's views of Hampshire. And remember, we need to do that with government as well, because they need to understand that investment in Hampshire at a time when it's all about levelling up and a focus on Midlands and the North, investment in Hampshire produces a fantastic return in terms of UK PLC. So it can't just be about investing in some of the places further north, but we have to tell that story, and you can't just sit back and let others do that. You can't just say, well, that's the county council's job, that's the LEP's job. Unfortunately, it's everybody's job. It only works when it is everybody's job, and they own the fact that they need to do it all. So I think it really is a fantastic opportunity for the place at the moment. You've got an absolutely amazing asset base. This is a story just waiting to be told. You're brimful of opportunities, and I wish you lots of luck on the journey. Hopefully it should all be out there in May, but we'll have started well before that. And as I say, watch out for that ambassador meeting in February. Have a great event.
Thank you very much, John. And what a great start to today's conference. Really interesting presentation. I'm amazed at the high degree of consensus there in terms of both the positives and the negatives about our region. And also the fantastic sort of starting point that we have. You know, what a great region, what a great story we have. But the one sort of alarm bell that you mentioned there, John, that I think we should be conscious of is the maybe the lack of ambition and the danger of complacency. We have a successful economy, so what do we need to? Why do we need to do anything? And certainly, I think the impact of the recession of recent months is going to bring a lot of that home to us. We do need to protect and enhance our economy going forward. So great start, John. Thank you very much. And it really does set the scene for others to follow. I don't have any specific questions, but one thing again that you mentioned was leadership. And I just wonder whether we can learn from examples around the country of how they have tackled the leadership issue with ambassadors and authorities working together. Could you just say a little bit about that? I think we might have lost John. We'll move on to our next speaker then, Robin Shepherd, who's a partner of Bart and Wilmore, planning and design consultancy, and he leads the practice's Southampton office. Drawing on his experience in private practice, the public sector, and leading national developers, Robin has a track record in leading complex regeneration schemes, creating and delivering new settlement proposals, and enabling community-led development projects. Robin has been working with Regen South in developing and implementing a communication strategy, pulling together the public and private sector to place Central South on the world stage. I'll now invite Robin to give us an update on these initiatives. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you, Tim. One of the terrifying things of speaking at these events is you have to rely on technology. So I assume you can hear me and you can see that okay. Thank you, Tim. I'm delighted to be speaking with you today. Despite all of the COVID situation and the lockdown woes, as it were, I think there's a lot to be delighted about. One thing you shouldn't be delighted about, though, is I was meant to be joined here as a double act with Ollie Soughton. So a big shout out to Ollie. We're meant to be doing a double act. Unfortunately for you, you only have me. So a bad start from that point of view. But there we have it. Thanks also to John Till. He's been doing some incredibly valuable work for Hampshire. But I think it's important also to note that what applies for Hampshire applies also, and probably more so, to Central South. Some of the messages, some of the lessons that have been mentioned there are very much applicable, and I'll be teasing out on some of those. And Tim, as you just mentioned just now, the complacency, if you like, and the need for action has been something that's very much been on our hearts and minds over the last year or so. Ollie was mentioning to me a couple of days ago that we can't rest on our laurels and also preserve and enhance what we have. This is an image taken by Tim Peake in his recent exploration. I found out recently that Tim was born in Chichester, so I'm going to claim him as our own. But one thing, the reason this image is up, if you like, is even before a Brexit world, we've been on the world stage. We may not have realised that, but we have. We're not competing with each other, but as Central South. Not just to Manchester even. Everyone hears what Manchester's doing and what Birmingham's doing and the levelling up, as the government call it. But we're not just competing with Manchester, but also to Madrid, to Montreal, to Milan. Like many regions, we've probably been guilty over a number of years for looking very inwardly. Yet the real threats and real opportunities come from outside. So, as Tim's mentioned, about 18 months ago, I was asked to lead a group from Regen South to look at a communication strategy, what John Till would call a narrative, if you like. So we've started. We've certainly not finished, but we've started, and that's good progress. And the premise for this was that Business South was in a unique position to bring together the public, the private sector, and the third sector as well. And a desire to shout about it. All the region had to offer. So many hidden gems, if you like. So we gathered a wide range of Business South champions representing the public, private and third sector, and we set about a plan. I'm just going to take you on a bit of a canter through of some of the gems that we found on the way, because I wasn't aware of all of this. Did you know that the Central South contributes £119 billion to the UK economy every year? It's got a 1 million workforce. It's obviously a full waterfront city economy. 79,000 students and growing. 1 million tourists per annum. Obviously, probably not this year, but even so. Leader, as John Tills mentioned, leader in air, land and sea. It's prime location because of the airports, its main train lines, its motorways and its ports. It, in effect, is a gateway, as we talked about, and a gateway in the UK to the rest of the world, both inward and outward. We've got specialist sectors of global marine and the maritime economy, employing 360,000 people. It was that many, I could barely say it. 1.7 million people normally go on a cruise out of this region. And we have normally host internationally recognised events, Cows Week and Southampton Boat Show, very well known, of course. We're a global hub for aerospace and defence technology. We've got organisations like BAE, Boeing, Airbus, organisations that other regions would be so enviable to have. But perhaps you don't shout about it enough. We know we don't. New technologies through research and development are being established through renewable energy, composite manufacturing, marine autonomous systems, and some of the imagery picks some of this up. There's 5 leading research universities. What other part of the UK, what other part of Europe, what other part of the world has that level of research university and specialism? And the world-renowned National Oceanography Centre to top it all. We've got a huge growth in the gaming sector as well within the region. MedTech is also growing and evolving within the Central South with some major players in the region. And as I mentioned before, the growth in degree and apprenticeships is being made available from education providers in the region. We're evolving, we're adapting, new opportunities, new growth. And within that, just looking at those pictures, and I'm looking forward to John Till's photography because I had to scrounge online, so forgive any plagiarism here, but just look at the environment. All of that happens within. Altogether, all of these unique assets create a quality of life. And yet for many years, we hid all this good stuff. For many years, people retired to the area. I'm going to retire to the south was a common terminology. People visited the area. People moved with families and jobs. And perhaps something that we picked up by Savills in a moment. COVID-19 and lockdown has taught us many things. Personally, it's taught me that standing at 8:15 on the Northern Line with no personal space too close to someone else's armpit is as unpleasant as it sounds. But other lessons, the value of green and blue space, parks, countryside, coast. It's taught us that working from home is possible. Here we are, a conference virtually. If someone said we'd be doing this 2 years ago, we wouldn't have believed them. The way we work has changed, but also time with families, time with friends, loved ones. Those are the things we've realised that are making a real difference to our well-being. As a consequence of that, people are thinking, people are making lifestyle choices, where to live, where to be, where to bring up families, where to exist. And this creates a huge opportunity for the Central South. If we plan for good, for green growth, if we capture economic growth, if we can also then protect the best the Central South has to offer. And we can only do those things together if we plan. I would say that I'm a planner, but we need a plan. So I'm just going to give you an overview of what we've been doing for the last year, 18 months on this narrative, if you like, through Business South. What have we done? Well, Regen South, as part of Business South, we've worked hard to promote the Central South brand. We've reinvigorated that brand and put it front and central. We brought together tens of businesses and organisations, including the vast majority of the councils, to a common purpose, shouting about all of this, shouting about all we have to offer on the world stage. It's still work in progress. We've still got much to do. There always will be, because as soon as we stop, someone else is going to overtake us, another region, another city, another place. All of these efforts, though, are gaining traction. People are talking. People are taking note. Tim's mentioned the unfortunate situation regarding MIPIM. Yes, it's been postponed for this past year, but the focus is very much there for 2021. We're working alongside the other groups in Business South, Workforce South, Maritime and Transport South, and the Lifestyle and Culture Group. We've reinvigorated and created a new Prosper magazine. The launch of that was meant to be at MIPIM again, so that's currently on hold, but we can use that information again, and it's drawing together all sorts of information and really shouting about what we have to offer. In a similar vein, we've got a video bringing together, and it's a collaborative exercise to make this happen. And thanks to BECG for their support in producing that. And it's a great way of explaining all of the things that we've got to offer in the Central South. We've met and we've lobbied MPs, ministers. We're engaging with the Partnership for South Hampshire. We're creating a website, and that's still to follow. But that will become a portal to bring together all of these good news. All of this information that we all share is happening in a disparate fashion. So we're looking for a portal and a way to bring together the various organisations. So, importantly, what next? Well, in an ever decentralising and competitive world in which we live, it's clear that doing the same as we've done even 2 years ago, a year ago, let alone 5, 10 years ago, if we continue to do the same, well, that won't put us ahead. Other regions are being very dynamic, and we have to be more dynamic than them. Other regions are shouting about it. Well, we have to shout louder than them. And importantly, we've got so many more assets to leverage, but that requires collective efforts. It requires repeated efforts. We can't just do it once and then think we've done it. It requires coordinated efforts. And we've all got a role to play in that. People often mention, how come through the government's levelling up, we're missing out? Why isn't government in its decentralising of its government departments? Why aren't they doing more down the south? Why are they putting more infrastructure investment and transport infrastructure investment and more money into other parts of the country? Well, it's quite clear when we've spoken to government that when we're making the bids for those things, we need to have one voice. We need to have a clear vision, a clear strategy for good growth, not bad, uncoordinated growth. Growth is an opportunity, not a threat. And that's the message that the government want to hear. They also want to hear, what do they get in return? If they put £1 into Central South, what do they get back? We know they get much more back, but that's the message they need to hear, and we need to be shouting about that. And importantly, we all succeed or fail by each other's actions, each other's successes, and each other's failures. We can succeed, we can feed off each other. So, your role. Forgive the couple of quotes there, I love an inspirational quote. But here comes your role. Later on, we have some panellists who are looking at collaboration across the Central South and what does the future look like? And a key question to the panellists later will be, well, what will they be doing? What will they be doing collaboratively? But importantly as well, I'm interested in your ideas. As an audience, come forward on the chat on the side with your ideas, with your suggestions about more things we should be doing. We have significant untapped potential in Central South. We've all got a stake in our region, and we need to share the burden, therefore, of shaping our region for the future. So let's be the best ambassadors for Central South that we can be. Together, we can make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robin. A really good talk and update on progress we're making, and it's great to hear the fantastic stories we've got to tell, and I suppose the frustration that we're not shouting about the success stories. Even recently, the idea of drones being manufactured in Portsmouth, ferrying packages across to the Isle of Wight, vaccines, etc. The companies in Southampton involved in the vaccine research. We've got some world-leading companies, and we've got a fantastic natural heritage in our area as well. The beaches of tourism industry in Bournemouth, the national parks, as you say, a lot to shout about. So, yeah, we need to do more, and I think we've got great opportunity to do that during 2021 as part of our economic recovery, and in particular the advantages of our region for a green recovery as well. Thank you, John. If we move now on to our next speakers, we've got a double act from Savills. We've got Lucian Cook and Dr. Lucy Cook, and Dr. Lucy Greenwood from Savills. Lucian is one of the country's most authoritative housing market commentators, having been a director in Savills' much respected research team since 2007. As an industry figurehead, he regularly presents on UK housing markets and frequently appears on radio and television. At Savills, he leads a team of 36 highly respected researchers. Collectively, they cover everything from social housing to the prime markets of central London and development land to residential investment. Dr. Lucy Greenwood is a director within the residential research consultancy team at Savills. She joined in 2013 and specialises in UK-wide development research. Lucy spends much of her time working on bespoke strategic development and investment reports for a wide range of clients. So very well positioned to give us an update on the impact of recent events on the residential market. Over to you, Lucian and Lucy. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for that introduction, Tim. I think Lucy is going to be controlling our slides this morning, and I'm going to kick off by having a look at the UK housing market and how that has panned out locally, and then Lucy is going to move on and talk about the development market. So the image that I've used in this first slide of Usain Bolt, I think, is pretty representative of how fast things have changed in the economy as a result of COVID. So if we have a look at the first chart by clicking, Lucy, you can see here the index of monthly economic output, which is taken from the government, and it shows the extent to which the events post-COVID have been quite different to any previous recession, that very rapid contraction in the economy, and prior to the first lockdown, the first bounce back. And I think just the nature of what we've been through means that the response of the housing market was always going to be different to that of previous recessions. And we knew that some of that was going to be the case just because of the circumstances in the run-up to the pandemic. So firstly, we have much lower levels of price growth in the 5 and 10 years in the run-up to the pandemic than we saw in, say, the run-up to 2007 or indeed the early 1990s. We've also have this incredibly low interest rate environment with renewed government and Bank of England action to bring in QE. And of course, what that has meant is that you haven't had the affordability pressures on the housing market that have been evident during previous recessions, when a recession has coincided with a housing market downturn. We've also had incredibly swift action from the government to protect jobs and finances, most notably through the furloughing scheme, but also through schemes such as mortgage holiday periods. And all of that has meant that there have been a lack of forced sales coming through the market. So there hasn't been an imbalance between supply and demand that we would normally expect. And then the government has acted incredibly quickly, more quickly perhaps than any of us expected, with the stamp duty holiday, which has resulted in a burst of what might be regarded as irrational exuberance amongst buyers as they wish to take the opportunity to get in before tax increases take effect. Now, all of that has meant that the housing market response will be different to that which we've seen previously. But one factor has really overridden all of those, and this is the one that Robin referred to previously, and that is this collective reassessment of our work-life balance and what that means for our housing needs. The expectation that we're going to be working from home more often, our requirements for having a property which is the hub of our family life and plays a part in our work life, and the prospect that whilst we might accept a slightly longer commute, we're going to be commuting less often. And I think that presents a very real opportunity in terms of the connection between this region and London in particular. And that's played out in substantially increased activity in the UK housing market and house price growth, whereas previously we would have seen some house price falls in a recession. So this data is taken from 20CI, and it shows the nature of the market response over the period since the beginning of the year, and price reductions, and then this subsequent very strong recovery underpinned by these lifestyle drivers. So in the last 4 weeks, the number of sales being agreed in the market across the whole of the market has been 44% above last year. That's been particularly strong at the top end of the market, and it's been underpinned by an increase in new transactions coming through. But the market has not remained completely dissociated from the economy, because to get that level of activity, we've had to see buyers remain relatively honest on price. And in some cases where they've overpriced, they've had to reduce their price to capture that surge in market demand. But it's not been the same for the whole of the market. So Lucy, if you could bring up the next slide. And here we've got some horribly stereotyped images of different family units. If we start with the mortgaged first-time buyer, whilst they have this incentive to get on the housing ladder, their ability to do that has been constrained by a lack of availability of higher loan-to-value and loan-to-income mortgage debt. And that means that they have become more dependent on things like the bank of mum and dad, and from a development perspective, Help to Buy. And in many cases where you've had development across this region, where Help to Buy is an intrinsic part of bringing that forward, that's pulled demand into the new build sector. By contrast, if we were to look at the mortgaged home mover, you can see the experience of lockdown, increased working from home, specifically a requirement for more space, has meant that a lot of those people who have delayed their move since the EU referendum have come back into the market. And that also has meant that we have seen quite significant levels of in-migration into the area, and a displacement of demand from London into the markets of Central South. So next slide, please. Comparing that then to the buy-to-let market, well, look, the buy-to-let market has been under some pressure for some time, a combined assault through regulation and taxation. And I think for those landlords who've been at the sharp end of the experience of economic pressures, where they've had non-payment of rent and rental arrears, I think that will mean they continue to question whether or not they wish to remain in that sector, and they may wish to rationalise their portfolio. But for those who are committed, who have diversified their risk, they have the ability to take advantage of what looks like it will be a lower interest rate environment to support their retention in the sector. And then the part of the sector that perhaps has been most strong is that cash buyers. Cash buyers has consistently been about a third of the market, often characterised by a downsizer market, and I think strong opportunities in the retirement housing sector, particularly in this part of the country. So to move on. So this slide's really interesting because it looks at how that has played out on a regional and more local basis. So you can see here levels of increased agreed sales, stronger in the southeast of England and the east of England than the rest of the country. And if you look at the two maps that we have here, you can see how that has supported activity, particularly in that area of the Central South. And the next slide shows that in more detail, how that's panned out across the area. So here I've taken the local authorities of Hampshire, Dorset and Oxfordshire and looked at where number of sales have been relative to the same time this year in the period since the 1st of June. And across every single part of the Central South, we have seen an increase in housing market activity. So those changed lifestyle drivers have been a catalyst for more activity in the market right across the region. The strongest, perhaps in the Uber towns of Winchester, a strong London relocation driver there, the very attractive New Forest and Basingstoke and Dean, where people perhaps looking for more space as they move out of their London area. Somewhat weaker, but still positive in some of perhaps the less affluent markets, the likes of Gosport, Southampton, and some of the more distant urban markets, including the Bournemouth, Christchurch, Poole generation. But this level of activity in the market, of course, is fundamental for areas of regeneration, particularly where they are hinged or based upon residential redevelopment, as it dictates the extent of the market which is available to sell into. So what do we think will happen? Next slide, please, Lucy, going forward. Well, in the first instance, let's click through. I do think that the extent of the economic pressures and the extent to which they will bear down, perhaps in a COVID-related economic hangover over the course of 21, means that the level of activity that we've seen in the market to date is going to be quite difficult to sustain going forward. Nonetheless, I think the second lockdown will have reaffirmed a number of those changed housing priorities that we've seen for a number of buyers. I think the vaccine as we go forward is going to be critically important as to the ability to sustain activity in the period in the period after the stamp duty holiday ends. Undoubtedly, there will be a rush of housing activity before that stamp duty holiday comes to an end, and thereafter, the vaccine is critical to seeing falling levels of employment to give consumers confidence in how that market plays out going forward. And then longer term, of course, we have this expectation of a much lower interest rate environment, but also a realization that at some point the cost which we've had in relation to government support is going to have to come through in a higher taxation environment. So the competitiveness of the region will become critically important then. So as we see things from there on in terms of what we expect to happen next year, this year and next year, this year we will end up with house price growth. I think next year is likely to be a market of three parts: strong activity in the first part of the year, but then perhaps a lull in activity, which will present a challenge to the region in the mid part of the year as we see some of the economic hangover of COVID, the lack of impetus in the market because of the removal of the stamp duty holiday going forward. And then as the vaccine takes effect, I suspect you will see that economic confidence rises again, and that will support a second bout of activity, strong activity towards the back end of next year, with a low interest rate environment underpinning the housing market going forward, despite some of the economic pressures that we're going to face in the medium term because of the longer term effects. So that, I think, gives you some coverage of the residential market. I'm hopefully going to hand you over to Lucy to talk about how that's impacted on the development market.
Thanks, Lucian, and hopefully you can hear me. Apologies for slight tech challenges. This has frustratingly jumped back to where we were just now. So just give me a second and I will move on to the next slides. So next thing I'm going to talk about is the development side of things and how many homes we're actually building at the moment and how the market has been disrupted and will continue to perform going forward. So what's been happening that's affected it really? Well, you've had disruption to construction generally this year because of the virus, and also social distancing, meaning that people have to space themselves out more and protocols need to be followed on site to be delivering the homes they're building. There have been changes, and Help to Buy is ending in 2023 at the moment. So the plan is that from 2021, from March next year, the Help to Buy scheme will be phased to just be those first-time buyers and with those regional caps. So we're starting to see that really come into effect now with those transactions that are happening and agreed at the moment being the last of the current scheme. The market is also exposed to market volatility across the whole market. So new build isn't sort of unrelated from the whole. It is part of all of the transactions that Lucian was just talking about just now. But there's some really strong benefits to what's going on at the moment as well, with government planning to be able to deliver more homes and really driving that house building targets. The planning white paper confirms this and really tries to think of ways to be able to increase it, and it will be interesting to see how that plays out and which parts of that are implemented in the future. But ultimately, government wants us to be building more homes. 300,000 by mid-2025 is a target that continues to come up. And alongside the private delivery, there is potential for the build to rent, the purpose-built private rented sector, as well as affordable housing delivery to expand. So we know that there is a huge need for affordable housing delivery, and therefore there is sort of potential to build a huge number of homes in that sector, depending on how much grant is available to do so. So just thinking about the new home side of things and how many homes we've actually been building and how this year has disrupted things, on this chart we can see how the market has performed over time. And since the 16th of March there, we've got weekly data on the number of homes built and completed. And this is across all tenures. So you can see the yellow bars there show the numbers, and that really dropped down in April and May and picked back up again, and is now actually back to levels that are equivalent to last year. So you can see that orange line showing where we are relative to the same week last year. Really positive signs, back to normal. But not every region is the same, and let's just have a look by region to see how the south is done relatively. Here we've got the difference in these new EPCs, the new homes completed, in the weeks between the 17th of August and 23rd of November. So that period where across the country nationally we'd reached last year's levels. And you can see at the bottom there, you've got London, Yorkshire and Humber, the east of England and the northeast below their previous levels. But there's markets at the top being well above them. The northwest standing out as being exceptionally high relative to those levels. But promisingly, the southeast and the southwest are both above last year's levels. So strong recovery and completions managing to stay at those levels despite the challenges of social distancing. So here we compare completions and starts, because one of the challenges we have at the moment is that homes are being completed quite positively, but in terms of the number of homes we are building, we need to continue to start building those homes to keep those completion levels up. And here you can see in the blue line the private starts of number of homes according to NHBC relative to the orange there, the completions. And you can see that they are lagging a bit. They're not terrible, but if we really do need to continue towards that 300,000 by mid-2025, those starts need to start increasing, and builders need confidence to be able to do that in order to get anywhere near those targets and make up for the lack of supply during this year as well. So I just want to finish with two key things to consider across the whole of the market for the future. One of whom is who we build for and who is actually buying new build homes. And here we've done some analysis between looking at buyers of new build and second-hand housing by type. And you can see that young families are the dominant buyers of new builds, closely followed by young couples and singles, buying more than they would be in the second-hand market. But as we move to the older generation, you start to see that there is a bit of a mismatch, and those that are sort of over 40 singles and couples, those mid-age singles and couples, and the over 60s, the green bar's higher than the blue, showing that they tend to buy second-hand far more frequently than they do buy new build. And what we've done is identify that actually there could be an additional 8,700 new homes sold to these two groups per year if just 10% of the market could be captured by the new build sector. So there's a huge opportunity here. We know that this area is attractive to downsizers as well, and therefore this could be a really strong growth area. The other key thing to consider is the build to rent market. So build to rent has been growing over time. You can see here the number of completions in the green line, growing since 2010 through to this year, and still continuing strongly despite some sort of volatility due to the COVID disruptions, and starts being even stronger than that. Now, we know that there are already some schemes in this area, predominantly in Southampton, but there's a huge opportunity not just in the city centres for build to rent, but also in suburban locations. In some of our analysis, we found that 53% of private renters actually currently live in suburban locations, and therefore actually providing family housing for those people is a real opportunity that this area could include as well. So thank you very much for all of that. Hopefully that worked for us all, and I'll hand back over to our next person.
Thank you very much, Lucy and Lucian, for your excellent presentation. And it's good to hear that at least one of our sectors has performed quite well during the last few months. I guess the challenge is what happens next year, as you were saying, with the end of stamp duty and the Help to Buy coming to an end as well. But no, a very positive message, and good to see the implications for the economy. We do have a question from Mark Pembleton, which I'd like to put to you. Really, it's really how you think the city economies of the Central South have changed permanently due to the pandemic. Have you any thoughts on that, please?
I mean, certain parts of the economy clearly have been under very significant pressure, most notably retail. And I think critical to the success of the region is going to be the success of our high streets in a post-COVID world, and that will, I suspect, require significant policy support, because what we know is that the area generally is one which has a very strong amenity offering. It's a strong market attracting demand coming out of London. Its connection with London is going to be critically important, and if it is to take advantage of some of the permanent lifestyle changes that we've made, it needs to rise to that. It needs to rise to that challenge. It needs to accommodate the increased propensity for home working. It needs to provide a fairly coherent social fabric to support that. And I suspect with more home workers, one of the things that you will find is your, if you like, your social interaction or your business interaction that has historically been within your business will actually be with a lot of other people who are in a similar environment. So you will probably a bit more diverse with other people who are perhaps working from home on a more regular basis. But the heart of it will still be the strength and the diversity of the city economies that we've got going forward. You know, in that respect, I think Bournemouth Poole conurbation is fairly well placed. It has an increasingly diverse economy. Clearly, it will face some challenges around tourism, but it does mean that some of the expertise that it has from the 3 universities in that location, particularly around, for example, the gaming industry that looks like a strong gaming industry, is something that it will need to capitalise upon.
Great. Thank you, Lucy. And just a quick question for Lucy. This is from Richard Summers, Director of Boyle & Summers. Can you explain why older buyers don't buy new homes so much? Is it partly due to concerns on space standards and quality?
I think that's a really interesting question, and if I knew the answer, then then it would be amazing to really dig into that. But to be honest, it's a matter of preference and about what's available to those buyers and what they want. So they are typically cash buyers. They are discerning. They can choose what they want. They're not reliant on Help to Buy to support them, like a lot of the younger generation who are helping using the scheme to support them, and therefore really dominating kind of that the new build market. But what is obvious is what the types of property that they do need. And in terms of that, attractive property that is easy to maintain, has low running costs, and is easily accessible, but to local amenities as well. And mostly in that sense, the healthcare is really important. So actually going back to the town centres, actually they can be really, really good for some of this retirement sector, because you have all those amenities on your doorstep and you're not being stuck out in the sticks. So it's definitely a growth area. We know it is. We've done some previous work on that too. And this area, if we provide the right product for those people, getting a bit more into what they need will be a really good area.
That's great. Thank you very much, Lucy. I'm conscious of time, so we've got one more quick question for Lucy from Brian Johnson, Chair of Solent LEP. You mentioned that the stamp duty holiday ending in the new year with the lag in completing sales, but hasn't it effectively already finished for buyers who are thinking of moving now?
Shall I pick this one up? So, I mean, I think you've got clearly significant pressure on the conveyancing and the mortgage approval system to get stuff through now in time for the stamp duty holiday. There is still a window. I would say that window is short. We all have an eye open as to whether the Chancellor might extend the holiday, because there will be people who clearly cannot complete in time to take advantage of it. You know, I suspect if he does anything, though, it will be some kind of transitional relief rather than any greater extension. But he will also, I suppose, be mindful that he's given a lot of support to the housing market, and some of that support is due to end at a point in time when unemployment is likely to peak. So I suspect you probably haven't seen, the end of support for the UK housing market to get through, this period of economic turmoil. It may just come in slightly different forms.
Great. Thank you, Lucy. We've got another question, but I'll put that to the town centre panel later on in the session, if that's okay. So I'm keen to move on to our next speaker now. So thank you to Lucy and to Lucian. Our next speaker is Daniel Revin Ellison. He's a creative geographer and explorer and founder of the London National Park City. Dan's work focuses on challenging himself and others to see the world in new ways. He does this by combining creative exploration, geography and communication to tackle social and environmental challenges. Launched in 2019, the National Park City is a major effort to make London greener, healthier and wilder through mass participation and collaboration. It's an idea that's catching on with National Park City campaigns in several major cities around the world. Dan is currently working on Slow Ways, an initiative he started to create a network walking routes that connect all of Great Britain's towns and cities. He's also a geographer, educator, children's author, and short film maker. Thank you. Over to you, Daniel.
Hi, thank you very much, and thanks for having me. It's great to be with you all. So that's right, I'm a geographer, and I'm going to be sort of sharing with you over the next sort of 15 minutes some thinking around this idea of national park cities. And I'd like to invite you to think about what that might mean for your city, or maybe the region as a whole. So I'm going to take you through a range of thinking. Ben Smith, my colleague, who's a trustee at the National Park City Foundation and a director at Arup, spoke last year. So hopefully I won't cover too much of the same ground. But looking at this map here, looking at this fantastic satellite image of the Central South region, I actually went to Farnborough Sixth Form College. My storming ground as a teenager was Hampshire, going out, spending time in nature, traveling around the countryside to go and see friends. I know this part of the world very well and very inspired by it. But I'm also inspired by this guy, David Attenborough. I'm sure that all of us are inspired by David and what he's achieved. And I hope that many of you have seen A Life on Our Planet, his sort of witness statement on Netflix, which is there to watch. And if you haven't watched it, I strongly recommend you sit down with the family and watch it. I have a copy of his book here. I just wanted to read something very briefly where he basically sets out halfway through the book that since the 1950s, on average, wild animal populations have more than halved. More than halved. And actually, it's far worse than that, because within the last 200 or 300 years, it's a far more dramatic loss. And it says here that 96% of the mass of all mammals on Earth is made up of human bodies and those animals that we raise to eat. Our own mass accounts for 1/3 of the total. Our domestic animals, chiefly cows, pigs and sheep, make up over 60%. The remainder, all wild mammals, from mice to elephants and whales, account for just 4%. So at the moment we're in the middle of a climate crisis, we're in the middle of a health crisis, but we're also in an ecological crisis, which is not just about us not being able to enjoy badgers. It's about actually our very ability to survive on this planet is under threat. And that can't be stressed enough in the context of how we imagine how the Central South may look in the future. Those were big numbers, but here in Britain, 1 in 4 mammals are at risk of extinction. Britain, the UK, is one of the most nature-depleted countries in the entire world, despite the fact we think of ourselves as a nation of wildlife lovers. And nature as a whole helps us to deal with the climate crisis, helps us deal with the effects of climate crisis around things like flooding, but also connection with nature, where we live, where we go, where we visit, makes us healthier, more productive, more creative. It creates us opportunities to reflect and have a better relationship with ourselves and others. So I was delighted when sort of reading through this book, I noticed as he goes through the solutions around the vision of what's needed, he talks about the National Park City model as being one of the things that's been done around the world alongside work in Paris and Singapore to make life in cities greener, healthier and wilder. So the idea of a London National Park City, I'm going to talk about London because it's where I live, but there are National Park City campaigns in cities around the world. The idea of a London National Park City to many people might seem like a ridiculous idea, because you might think of London as a phenomenally concrete city, which obviously there is a lot of concrete. But the reality is that London is one of the most species-rich, species-diverse regions of the UK, often far more rich in species than surrounding countryside, where monoculture and monocrops actually push nature out. So a national park city, just like a rural national park, I think is partially about celebrating all the great things about the landscape, but it's also about recognizing our shared pains and about saying how can we come together around the threats that we face and that other species face within this landscape and think about what we can do to overcome them. So the London National Park City is a place you can explore. It's a place you can make better, you can make worse. It's a vision, a contested vision that you can share, just like the vision for the New Forest National Park or the Lake District National Park. But it's also a movement of people working together to improve quality of life by making the city greener, healthier, wilder, getting more people outdoors more of the time, which we all know the benefits of that. But also crucially creating a new identity for London and Londoners, an identity which is about questioning what that means to be a child growing up in a national park city, but also what might it mean for a business, whether you're in the tourism sector or the manufacturing sector. How might that vision change your decision making and what you choose to do? So a national park city, like a rural national park, is partially about policy, about how do we protect green spaces and create green corridors and look after wildlife and make sure that more people have connection to those spaces. It's also about partnership, because it's about saying how can government and business and people come together to spread ideas and good practices and finance and investment more quickly and more equitably across the landscape. But crucially, it's about people every day, everywhere, being able to benefit from this idea for the particular landscape. So National Park City is different to some initiatives that are out there, because really it's about being focused on people and what people can do, and how culture is at the center of this idea. The people who create culture, changing behaviors and making the changes we want to see. The story is at the heart of this, a story you can buy into and understand and be part of. And the idea that not only can we tell the story of the National Park City, but crucially, actually you can create the story by the things that we do. By doing things, we create histories and we can tell those stories, which then changes the way we behave. That language is key. We know that a national park is fundamentally about having a better relationship with nature and enjoying ourselves in that space. What better vision can we imagine for our cities in the future? Yes, work is important. Yes, all the economics everyone has been talking about is important. But fundamentally, don't we want to have a good time with our kids and start to restore nature? It's about landscape. And that landscape perspective, just like in the New Forest National Park or in the South Downs National Park, means that everyone and everything and everywhere in that landscape is included, whether they know it or not, like it or not, are doing good things or bad things. And the game, the challenge around a national park city or a national park idea is around driving awareness so more people are aware and more people are acting and doing good things in that environment more often. Finally, it's not an initiative that comes and goes, it's forever. It's forever, which means that when we consider what we've inherited from our ancestors, this is a thing that we can pass on as good ancestors to future generations. So central to the National Park City idea has always been, with all the people that we've worked with through the National Park City Foundation, the charity that we set up to help it, through the movement that's there, is a question around what if and why not? And this what if question is in an imaginary space where we say, right, well, if London is a national park city, what if things were different? Right? What if? That sets that backdrop. And you follow that up then by saying, well, why not? You know, if we're a national park city and we want these things to happen, why aren't they happening and how can we make it happen? And that why not question is a political question. It's a cultural question, which is about building up the energies of people to drive through changes. And I'm going to whiz through a bunch of fun examples around this, which I think we can apply to nearly any city. You know, so what if all the developers on this call committed to creating hedgehog highways through all the gardens and all the developments, and maybe making pollinator corridors as they go as well? What if all communities decided to close down streets when there were toad and frog migrations for their sort of breeding patterns? What if we had far more street art to connect people to the species which sometimes are invisible in the landscape, but are so crucial to a healthy ecological network? What if we got our policies in line and our culture in line, so people were ferocious about how they encroached onto streets with green pots, and this would be seen as completely acceptable, whereas maybe a private car taking up even more space on the street and doing less good for the environment may be seen as less acceptable? What if we embraced ivy for the fantastic thing that it is? What if we were to retrofit and future fit all future homes to be as good as possible for wildlife, and we realized that plastic lawns and concrete gardens are not as invested as what looks like an uninvested garden when that garden's all sort of feral and far wilder? What if, I love this image from WATM, the architects, we reimagined our streets as being prioritized for people and corridors for people here rather than just for vehicles. And the National Park City idea isn't just about the green stuff. I just love this from the architects Farrells, who a couple of years ago did this illustration for us as part of the campaigning, which shows this vertical common. I mean, how many tall buildings have we all seen where the side of a skyscraper or a side of an office block has no windows on it? why not have climbing walls or via ferrata that people can climb on? And why not, just like in the Lake District or the Peak District, if you fall and die, it could be completely your fault rather than on the developers. Surely we can achieve that, and this would make urban landscapes more interesting as well. And another project I've worked on is around slowways, which I hope all of you might be interested to get involved with. What if, just like our road network, which is so well signed and so easy to navigate around, and if you think about it, so ambitious in its development, we were to have a similar network for walking routes. So throughout the central south, if people wanted to walk from Basingstoke to Southampton, or Winchester to Salisbury, or Petersfield to Alton, actually it's really clear and easy how you do that. You don't have to have a GCSE in geography or a Duke of Edinburgh's award. It's just something you can go out and do. Why not work with me to help make that happen? What if over the M3, imagine if we linked our landscapes across the M3 with fantastic green bridges, wild bridges like this, that the Dutch, the Americans are so much better than the British at. And this is Knepp, which I'm sure many of you will have heard of, where on the left you can see what this farm used to look like. It's been rewilded to look like what it looks like on the right, this sort of ferociously wilder landscape with much greater bioabundance, biodiversity. We think probably far better as well at absorbing carbon. What if more of the landscape looked like that? And I just love this German image. You don't need to speak German to make sense of this particularly. And what it kind of shows is probably Hampshire at the bottom, and maybe actually something closer to the Surrey Hills at the top of that image, but where we've got these different types of farms. And we know how proud we are of our hedgerows in Britain, but we could do so much better in terms of the landscape. And I just do this cross section here in terms of looking at part of Hampshire. And it's interesting because a bit like when you see those images of the rainforest, and it's all like trees, and then you reach a border, and then there's no trees between, like, I don't know, like going to Haiti and Dominican Republic or something like that, or on the edge of a national park in Brazil. Actually, if you look at the eastern and northern boundaries of Hampshire, it's virtually barren in comparison to neighbouring Surrey, for example. I think Surrey is a great place to look to for tree coverage. But you can see here in the south of this image in Hampshire, where you've got this network of trees and deeper hedgerows beginning to form a bit of a nature recovery network, which is this sort of big idea that many of the charities and the government have. But as you go to the north of the image, it's obviously looking not quite so good. So the point is, we have this practice, we just need to scale it up, roll it out more quickly. And one idea that I absolutely love, that I love throwing out to people, is that although our hedgerows are absolutely iconic in the British landscape, and I'm extremely grateful for them, in practice, they are a tiny slither. They're like 0.0 something % of the landscape as a whole. What if in the central south there was the ambition to encourage or incentivize or persuade or reward, alongside government support, I'm sure, to make every single hedgerow, where it's appropriate, doubly as big, with a path going down the middle for animals and for people to move through. And so what you see here is some mapping from Ordnance Survey based in Southampton, where they've mapped out all the hedgerows in England. There's something like 373,000 kilometres of hedgerows in the country. Imagine if all those, wherever possible, were doubled in size. I'd love OS, if they're on this call, to release that mapping so we could see what that would look like. But we need to think of this at scale as well. And I just love this example of the American Prairie Reserve, which is a private initiative, but at a national park scale in the United States, where they're restoring the prairies and bringing back buffalo, but they're thinking in an intergenerational way, where when people die, they leave their properties to this initiative. They're thinking about how they can reward farmers through labeling and joint branding to encourage Knepp-style farming practices, but they're thinking at this massive scale. So the map you're looking at here is almost like, the sort of Hampshire region kind of scale, I guess, or something like that. Imagine if we thought in a similar way. So in the London National Park City, we have 50 National Park City Rangers so far, who are all about catalysing and spreading good practices and ideas that exist in the city, but we need to have more of. And our ambition is to have 1,000 rangers in the not so distant future, sharing these ideas, sharing these solutions, which we have in the city already for tackling the ecological crisis, the climate crisis, and other challenges we face. And what if across Southampton, the central south region, you thought about having 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 rangers to help spread those good ideas and practices? So this here is an image to give you a scale of London. Obviously, this is like the sort of maybe the conurbation area, the metro area of London, actually stretching right across the southeast of Britain. But when I look here at the same scale of map, centering on Southampton, you see that the central south sort of area is comparable in size. But arguably, rather than thinking about centering this on the urban centre, I think there's something very exciting to be done around centering vision on the New Forest and imagining how the region is an ecological centre, a green centre, a centre for green revolution, rather than just being an urban centre and having that classic story. Recentering thinking, recentering priorities. And when I see this image here, what I see is this sort of fragmentation between the New Forest and National Park and the South Downs National Park, two of my favourite places in the country. And I can't help but draw a couple of lines on here, just imagining what it would look like to really think about how to link those up through those bridges, through those corridors, and through actions like I've described before. And of course, there are already things happening in the region to help make those sort of things happen. So the fantastic work being done by the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust with their Wilder strategy, which I suggest you check out, and think about joining Team Wilder, which Deborah, I'm sure, will touch on a little bit later, and their ambitions. Joining the Green Halo Partnership, which is centred on the New Forest, but thinking about how the New Forest has an impact into the region as a whole, led by Alison Barnes, CEO of the New Forest National Park, who's heavily involved in the London National Park City as well. And then thinking on a visionary level, there's a project we have with some of the AONBs and national parks in the southeast, all about reimagining the future of the southeast of Britain, centred on the London City region, around a prize to design that future, what it might look like. So you might want to get your teams in on that. So, incredible place, incredible assets, incredible coastlines, one of the most beautiful parts of the country, really not necessarily as proud or as shouty as it could be in terms of how brilliant many of those things are. So what if, and I guess the question I'd leave you with as a challenge is, what if your city was a national park city? Or what if the ambition was to go bigger and asking, what if your region was a national park city region of some kind? What might that mean in terms of collaboration and vision and ideas and how people engage? Those are my details. Hope you found that interesting. And if you've got the power to do any of those things that I just shared, please do.
Dan, thank you very much. What an exciting and enthusiastic presentation from you, and a really different perspective, I think, on the region and how we can sort of promote our natural assets, protect them going forward, and the significance of them. A couple of very quick questions. We've got a question from Sarah Timberlake, CEO of Business South. How can we achieve national park city status in the central south? Could we be a national park city cluster, for example? One of your what-if questions. And then linked to that, a question from Brian Johnson, chair of Solent LEP, about the potential for solar power generation, renewables, reusing some of these natural assets, if you like, to economic advantage for our region. So we've got economic activities and natural assets working together in harmony, if you like. Any thoughts on those 2 points?
Yeah, I think on the assets, obviously, I don't know exactly the place or exactly the situation that's been described there in terms of the solar, but clearly we need solar in the mix of solutions around a vision like this. It doesn't make sense to be doing everything we can for nature to make where we live super green and yet wrecking the climate at the same time and destroying nature elsewhere and in the future nature, where we live as well. But I think that there's lots of scope to explore how the sites where solar and other approaches could be multifunctional, so they're providing better space for nature while also providing space, for example, for solar, and finding ways to make sure the two are complementing one another. In terms of national park city status for a cluster of cities, so national park cities or a national park city in the region, it's completely possible. And there's an application process that's been launched in January for other cities that are interested. If you're drawing a family of campaigns and cities around the world that recognize that the landscape approach is not just about nature, it's also about recreation, it's about health, it's about economy. And so, other cities include Adelaide, Sacramento, Calgary, Glasgow. So strong network. And essentially it's about getting your politicians on board, business on board, local citizens on board, and working with the National Park City Foundation to make sure you've got the right chemistry. But I know that the region has all the ingredients to make fantastic national park cities, but there is some work to be done to get to the starting line.
Great. Thank you once again, Dan. Debbie Tam will be picking up on the point about some of your wilder proposals for the forest wilderness. So we will be picking that up later. But moving on, we've now got a panel session. We're going to kick off with a presentation from Robert Delius of Stride Tregaun about a case study of the Bath City Centre. Rob is an architect and head of sustainability for Stride Tregaun, and his key interests are well-being, placemaking, and sustainability. Last year, he was one of the co-creators of the Therapeutic City Festival in Bath with local design group Architecture IS. The 7-day event explored how to make places good for the mind, body, and soul, and hosted a wide range of speakers, as well as collaborating on closing main thoroughfares in the city to traffic during the festival. Rob was behind the practice's shortlisted entry for RIBA International Competition, Reimagining the Garden City, and has been the winner of 2 other RIBA competitions, Tomorrow's Garden City, A Sustainable Approach to Living, and Imagine Bath. He was the architect for Great Bow Yard, which was named most energy efficient street in the UK when it was completed. He's behind several initiatives, including 52 Big Ideas for Bristol, Waters of Bath, and Bristol Colour Capital. Over to you, Robert.
Thank you very much, Tim. Just going to share my screen now. I hope you can all see that. So yes, thank you. And this is obviously a very difficult task to follow Daniel's excellent presentation, but I'll do my best. So I'm going to be talking to you briefly about some lessons from Bath. And as Tim said, we ran a festival called the Therapeutic City last year, and talking about what we can learn from that. So this scene that you'll see on the screen at the moment is from that festival, and how we managed to close a street during that event, and the kind of fantastic feedback and success that it was. So just gonna get to the main screen. So this is actually a scene from earlier this year, which is a massive change, and we're all aware that our cities and towns are facing some real challenges with COVID, with competition from online retail, and with austerity now and in the future. And I think we should also be aware that even before COVID, the NHS was under huge strain from record levels of anxiety, stress, depression, loneliness, and obesity. And so the question is whether our cities and our towns can actually help with addressing some of those issues. And I definitely think they can. And that's what the purpose of the festival was to see how cities can be good for the body, mind, and soul, and how they can actually create successful placemaking through health and well-being. So we ran a series of talks and events over a week-long period, asking these questions. And the festival really came about because Bath was applying to UNESCO for an extra heritage status based on its therapeutic landscape. So John made a talk earlier, which was sort of asking stakeholders what people thought of different regions. And I imagine many of you might associate Bath as quite a quaint city. But the reality is that when it was designed, the Georgian part of the city, it was very radical for its time. So people came to Bath for getting cured in its thermal waters, but the new crescents, the public spaces, the broad footpaths, it was actually a whole kind of a new way of designing cities to embrace landscape and health and well-being. And so Bath is really the original kind of well-being city. And this new landscape was all about what was known as kind of taking the cure, spending time in this landscape and making you feel good after it. So Bath has this legacy of this fantastic landscape from the Georgian design that we can enjoy today. And much of these spaces during COVID are effectively kind of imagine them as a large living room for residents of the city to be able to enjoy these fantastic landscape settings. And this picture shows you how the kind of landscape weaves in between the buildings. So it has a lot of tree canopy in the city, a a lot of allotments and a lot of green space which we can enjoy today. But a lot of our streets are very clogged with traffic and with parked cars, and this is the reality, and this is something which we were trying to kind of explore how we tackle during the festival. So one of the things that we did is we worked with the West of England Combined Authority and with the council to explore closing some streets in the city for a temporary period. And as you can imagine, there was probably quite a bit of resistance from local business owners who were worried about losing the kind of the parked cars in front of their shops and what that might mean for their businesses. But you can see from the picture what an amazing success it was, and the reaction from the kind of local council and from residents was really very overwhelming. And the feedback from the businesses was, in fact, that it was hugely successful for them. And so what we're working with now is to see how we can actually roll out this idea of closing streets to traffic in other parts of the city. One of the themes which came out of the festival, and we had a number of great speakers, and Piers Taylor, the broadcaster, was one of them, was about, his view was that the local authority was consistently failing to provide a cohesive vision for Bath beyond the banal rhetoric of shopping and tourism. And I think this is very true. And what we were suggesting within the festival was whether we could actually kind of rethink the city as a therapeutic city. So what does that actually mean? So one of the ideas that we talked about during the festival was the idea of introducing water features as a kind of a way of celebrating Bath's sort of well-being legacy and its sort of national and international reputation as a thermal spa city. And there's a lot of scientific evidence behind spending time near water being good for your reducing your heart rate and your blood pressure. And we all know that water can be an absolute magnet for children. And if you can create a city for children that they can enjoy, it's good for everyone. And there's a lot of people kind of say the fact about if you design a city for the 8 and the 8-year-olds, and then it will be a successful place for everyone. And I think that's very true. But Bath, although it has traded on its water and its well-being for millennia, the Roman baths on the left and the new kind of thermal spa complex on the right, there's so much more it could be doing. And in kind of exploring this idea, I looked at a number of other towns and cities across the UK, and there really is a water renaissance as people are embracing how they can introduce water into their urban environments to help with placemaking and well-being. But it's very ironic that in Bath itself, there is actually very little evidence of water. And this is despite the fact if you see the signs for the city, it's sort of selling itself as Bath Spa, and even has a picture of a water feature next to it. And I think the idea of a spa city is a very interesting one, and it's something that perhaps all cities could be exploring. So this is a diagram of the latest kind of spa complex in the city. And like many other spas, it's a series of treatment spaces, a series of different rooms offering different treatments which are either kind of invigorating or relaxing. And what if we looked at the city and imagined the whole city as a spa? So taking some of its public spaces and imagining them as a series of treatment rooms. So in some of the public spaces, they're perhaps green spaces and some are blue spaces. And thinking about them in terms of spaces or rooms instead of streets really helps us focus on creating places where people want to dwell and stay rather than pass through. So this is what we want to see is public spaces with water as the backdrop to everyday life. And this kind of whole idea of rethinking the city is something that Singapore has really embraced. And they've taken a whole vision of themselves as a city in a garden. So they're increasing the amount of green space exponentially in the city. And every new development has to replace the footprint of the building in which it occupies within the site with green space, whether that is horizontally or vertically. And in Bath itself, this is actually amazingly a picture, sort of very central, looking across, and there's all sorts of streets and buildings within this shot which are out of sight. But you can see from the amount of greenery, it's really challenging the idea of what a city is, and thinking about it rather than green space in the city, but the whole city within green space. And as Daniel said, this is very much the kind of model, I suppose, that London's taken, whereby it's rethinking the city rather than as streets and buildings, but rather as green space, but with buildings sat within it. And Bath is very much the landscape city, and we're really on a journey now to explore how we can embed kind of landscape within the whole of the city. And if you think about the city in a different way in terms of kind of blue areas and green areas, areas of activity and play, areas of calm and sensory delight, it's about kind of remapping your city in these terms. And these are all the things that actually people have been remapping their own cities during lockdown. They've been seeking out these places, and this is what we need to be designing cities around. And within the festival, we also looked with Borough Happold at the river corridor, which I suppose, like many other cities in the UK, rivers have traditionally not been celebrated in many cases, and there's so much opportunity that we can do to kind of re-look at our river corridors. And we were exploring with Borough Happold the opportunity for outdoor kind of bathing using thermal waters next to the river. And looking at there's something called the Bath Skyline Walk, which is a National Trust walk around the city, and we proposed an idea that the skyline could become the Riverline Walk as a sort of sister complementary walk, and the idea that along the river corridor there'd be a series of spaces and events to really make the most of the river corridor, and how that could potentially weave into a map celebrating all the different water locations within the city as well. And this has been adopted by the council, and then they've now turned this into a whole new master plan for the river corridor, and kind of thinking about it as a tube map. So just to conclude, this was a slide from the festival that Andrew Grant used, which was from a very interesting kind of concept in Australia, where they're looking at city making and buildings in a different way, looking at their medicinal value rating, their food production rating, their healthy people rating. So these are the ways that we need to be now rethinking our development in our cities. And just to show you the street that I showed earlier now, we've actually managed to take traffic out of it altogether. So what was a temporary experiment has now turned into something more permanent, and a park that's popping up along that street. So just to conclude, I think we need to be thinking about our cities more than just shopping and tourism, and maybe rethinking them completely as a spa or garden, and remapping them in terms of their blue space and their green space, and not just thinking about them in terms of roads and buildings. And I would encourage you all to experiment like we did with taking the cars out of the street during that period, and often the kind of obstacles that you think are there actually can be overcome. And then finally, we all know that health and well-being has been massively important during the last few months, and people are seeking out more than ever. So we need to be really rethinking how we design our cities and space to think about well-being.
Great. Thank you very much, Rob. Thank you again. Another really stimulating presentation. I have a question from Samantha Clough, Director of PR Marketing at BCG. It's really in relation to the last point you raised. What do you think needs to happen to ensure public health across future development?
I think, like Piers made the point in the presentation, I think there needs to be a big vision, and I think that's often what is lacking. So it's down to places like organisations like Business South and the council to come up with that strategic vision, which all developments then can fit within. And I think until you have that, everything can be very piecemeal.
Great. Thank you, Rob. Well, it's really set the theme for our panel discussion now. So if I can turn to our first speaker for the panel, it's Kate Martin from Southampton City Council. And just before I do that, there are a couple of questions that have been asked during the course of today, which I'd like the panel to think about. The first one is for Kate, Natasha, Philip and Chaz, and it's a question from Samantha Clough, Director of BCG. With the emergence of more and more empty shop units, does the panel have a view on what our high streets will look like in 5 years' time? So maybe you could think about that in your presentation. And then a question for Debbie Tan from Brian Johnson, Chairman of the Solent LEP. The rewilding idea is very appealing. We are working on such a scheme with the Hampshire Wildlife Trust to unlock development sites by offsetting nitrates. Can you have a think about how rewilding can be balanced with other land uses, Debbie? But firstly, if I turn to Kate Martin and ask Kate to put her camera on, Kate is responsible for place on the executive management team at Southampton City Council. She supported the delivery of place-shaping outcomes in local government for over 20 years, most recently at director level for the City of Wolverhampton Council, the London Borough of Camden and the London Borough of Brent. Prior to this, Kate led public services in the Midlands and the northwest of England. Kate is passionate about placemaking, with an award-winning UK track record of leading economy, business, leisure, development planning, infrastructure, environment, property and commercial partnerships and neighbourhood services. Over to you, Kate.
Thank you, Tim, and good morning, everyone. So what does the future look like? Well, for Southampton, well, it's really strong for Southampton, and we're working to our council plan, which sets out a very clear vision and to be a greener, fairer and healthier city for all, working jointly with our city partners, our Hampshire partners and obviously our Central South partnerships. During the pandemic, our work hasn't stopped, and actually we've been transforming and strengthening our planning and our resilience work as we move forward into a new era in 2021. Our local plan 2022 vision has been consulted on, and we'll be sharing more information around that in the new year. And this sets out our vision well for the city, our strategic land supply and some fantastic new opportunities, including up to 9,000 homes coming forward in the future. Our development proposals are based on sustainable development principles and are fully supported through our Green City Charter. We are already investing over 90 million in green technology, green buildings and sustainable ways of working to ensure that we move forward as a city to a low carbon economy. We are part of the Green Halo Partnership, and we are considering the opportunities that the National Park city principles and concept could bring to the city, as well as responding and considering our approach to the new environmental bill in the future. And we've just adopted, as part of a Hampshire collaboration, our green print for recovery. In terms of our economic recovery, our leader has led a business task force to co-produce over the summer months and into the autumn the economy and green growth strategy for the city. And this is a 10-year vision for economic recovery for our city. This sets out priorities quite clearly around employment and skills for our local population and also supporting our local businesses, but also sets out a new vision for our place shaping and to put Southampton as an international city on the map. As a city council, we are investing over £300 million in capital programmes already, and we're not shying away from difficult decisions in the current time. And an example of this is in the summer, we agreed a further £144 million for 1,000 new affordable homes across the city, directly delivered by the council. And we're working on our future high streets core to refocus our central area to ensure that our high streets are competitive and resilient in the future. A lot of talk at the moment has been about place shaping, and what is absolutely key for the green growth for our city is investment in infrastructure and our wider connectivity. Over £60 million we're co-investing with Hampshire partners in our Transforming Cities Fund for Transport. We are continuing to roll out our 5G connectivity as part of our intelligent city infrastructure work. And we're working on our decarbonisation plan and energy and infrastructure management programmes. Key to our success is also working with our local businesses with the Solent LEP, and we were pleased to announce only last month joint working with the Solent LEP, ABP Port Southampton, our brand new Cruise Terminal 5 and shore power opportunities, over £50 million worth of investment, actually bringing our cruise ships back to the city in the summer of 2021. As part of this place shaping work in the new year, what colleagues will hear about is actually our brand new Mayflower Quarter master planning. And this will be launched an ambitious once in a generation opportunity to reshape the Mayflower Quarter area of the city. 84 hectares of prime real estate land and waterfront development is part of our master planning area. So that's twice as big as Canary Wharf. 1.2 million metres squared of gross external area in terms of investment opportunities. A fantastic opportunity to build on our green growth, including over 3,500 new homes, an education campus and health and wellbeing facilities, a brand new central business district city with grade A office accommodation focused around our central station expansion programme, with fantastic connectivity and regional connection, including supporting the re-electrification and the reopening of the Waterside line from Southampton down to Fawley Waterside. We know also that we want to transform our waterfront and our waterside park. And what we're looking to do here is a brand new waterfront, a cultural destination, a cultural landmark building, and a brand new leisure, sport, recreation and hotel opportunities along the waterside frontage. And this will be key for our legacy as we bid for City of Culture 2025. And this is really regionally significant as well as important for the city. We've heard today how cultural industries, creativity and green growth can help us recover the city. And this is a fantastic opportunity. So I would recommend to everyone to back our bid. Let's bring the City of Culture for the first time to the South Coast. Support Southampton 2025 and be part of our journey.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you very much for your contribution. Exciting times for Southampton, as you say. So turning to our next speaker is Natasha McIntyre Hall. Natasha is Assistant Director of Strategic Developments at Portsmouth City Council. She's a visionary regeneration specialist with a reputation as one of the UK's foremost young programme managers, driving a multi-billion-pound modern sustainable transformation agenda aimed at making Portsmouth Britain's premier waterfront technology and innovation city. Natasha is also currently touring high-profile international events as a keynote speaker and panel member, promoting the work her teams are doing and showcasing her groundbreaking approach to regeneration. Over to you, Natasha.
Hello, also, so what so I think this
Natasha, I think
me
problems with hello, Natasha. Sorry, I think we're having difficulties hearing you on screen. Perhaps if we can come back to you shortly, and we'll go to another speaker first and try and come back to you shortly. Okay. If I can turn then to Councillor Philip Broadhead, the Bournemouth, Christchurch and Paul Deputy Leader with responsibility for regeneration, economy and strategic planning. In his time in these roles, Councillor Broadhead has driven forward some of the largest regeneration projects on the South Coast, with even bigger plans for the future, with opportunities for the new larger council. With a population nearing 500,000, the BCP urban area is one of the fastest growing city regions in the country. Philip also holds a number of national positions, again with a specialism in regeneration and innovation. He serves on the Local Government Association Board in Westminster, as well as being a member peer, serves on the Key Cities SI Group, leading on high streets and city centres, is the executive lead on the Bournemouth Development Company and the deputy chairman of the Conservative Councillors Association. Over to you, Councillor Moorhead.
Yes, thank you very much, Tim, and thank you everyone for giving me the opportunity to be here today. I apologise about my background. I've had to move rooms 3 times due to connection issues. So you're all seeing the tree that my kids have decorated in the last few days. So it gives you something to look at if what I say isn't very interesting. But yes, thank you very much for that introduction. This is obviously a very important issue at the moment, how our town centres are going to be in the future, which is why I'm actually taken forward the lead on this through the Key Cities Group, which is based in Westminster as part of the Local Government Association, about how high streets are going to be in a post-COVID world. So we all recognise that this is going to be a real issue going forward, but of course it's nothing new. This is something which has been in train for some time, and I think all that's happened is that the COVID crisis has really just accelerated what we all knew was happening anyway. We've got some massive opportunities, as you've heard in the introduction, in the BCP area. We are one of the fastest growing city regions in the UK. But in terms of how we deal with this problem, I fully agree with Robert's presentation about what they're doing in Bath. I think really key to how we transform our high streets in particular is that everyone needs a USP. So in Bath, as we've heard, that kind of water and connection with things are the key. Down in Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole, we're quite fortunate. We have a foot forward already in that we already are a destination, because I think that retail is changing, high streets are changing, and it is becoming much more destination and experience-led. So we're very fortunate. We're already a destination in and of itself, and actually really interesting stats that we found after the first lockdown, and that when high streets reopened after the first lockdown, the Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole area was the fastest bounce back in the country in terms of footfall. So immediately, because we have that destination status, we were able to bounce back really, really quickly. That's good news. The bad news, however, is that shortly after the summer, we then suffered and were the worst for footfall decrease in the whole country as well. So we went from number 1 to last place. And again, that's because we are a destination. I think the key about that is therefore transforming and figuring out how we can be a destination for everybody rather than just a destination for people coming into the area. So the key things are how do we do that? How do we transform high streets going forward? What do we actually need to do on the ground, particularly in our roles in local authorities? A number of things. Firstly, I'm a big believer in planning policy and in particular zoning. And almost if you zone it, they will come. I've taken on the strategic planning portfolio along with regeneration in my area, precisely because if we do want to have a strategic direction about the area, you can't leave it all to the open market. You really have to put that strategic direction into practice by having a really key idea about how you want to zone areas through a planning policy. And we've got a very good opportunity here down in BCP. Not only are we a brand new council, bringing together 4 legacy councils, we're also undergoing a new local plan process for that whole area. So we've got a real positive way to actually do that. The other part that I would point out is about being slightly more interventionist as local authorities than we have in the past as well. We're going to be bringing forward soon in the BCP council area retail first policy, where actually as a local authority we're getting more interventionist and actually getting involved in the retail sector, particularly to bring out those independent retailers, which are the ones, as we've seen from many statistics, are really thriving through the area. But of course the key thing, and the key title of this conference is about regeneration, and regeneration is an absolutely central part of high streets going forward. We're very fortunate in the BCP area. We've got some incredible regeneration opportunities, 1.7 billion of regen projects through council property alone, and creating over 4,000 homes. And if you transform the place, I think that helps to transform your economy as well. And across our areas in Bournemouth, for instance, we've got the Winter Gardens development, which is one of the biggest regeneration opportunities on the south coast. I think we've got some interesting opportunities presenting ourselves going forward as well in the department store area. So there's a lot of press at the moment about department stores failing, but never waste a good crisis. And we're in advanced talks with a number of our department stores about how we use those big real estate opportunities to revitalise town centres as well. Pool is another matter completely. It's an almost blank canvas for us. It's a huge opportunity almost to start again. Many have said that they would do it in the past and drawn pretty pictures. I think now's the time to really get on with it and get some cranes in the sky. I'm a big believer that if you demonstrate to the market that things are happening, that has a snowball effect. And at the other side of our area, we've got Christchurch, which is really oozing with heritage and a very different type of destination. We've got some regen opportunities there as well. So that regeneration piece, alongside re-envisioning how retail actually works, I think is a great springboard for how we can see our high streets thrive in the future. But finally, I would point out that we also need to think smart, not just smart in terms of our strategy, but smart in terms of our innovation as well. And again, one of the things that we're hitting the national stage on here in the BCP area is our Smart Cities programme. So harnessing our digital and creative technologies to bring new businesses, new creative businesses into the area. All the more important as people, as we heard from Savills earlier on, are thinking very carefully about where they need to base themselves and base their businesses. And that digital innovation is at the heart of that. And we've got the first, one of the first 5G closed networks in the world where new and innovative technologies that want to use that 5G technology can come and test it in a closed environment, but open to anyone. And again, that's bringing new businesses into the area, which in turn helps to revitalise the high street. More people work there, more people live there. High streets become something very different. So a lot of work to do. There was a question earlier on about what it looks like in 5 years. We're doing a big piece of work on that on a national scale with other cities around the country. But I think that change in people living in high streets, regeneration, and that smart high streets for the future will all be part of it.
Thank you very much, Philip. And on a personal note, great to see the Bournemouth Development Company projects coming to fruition. A very sort of bold move by the council to enter a private partnership to bring forward development on those sites as part of those initiatives. So good to hear progress being made on that. I must apologise for Natasha. We're struggling to get her connected today, but I'm hoping that she'll be able to make a contribution for the chat function on our network here. But unfortunately, the internet connection is not proving very reliable, and she's having real difficulties. So apologies for that. If I can move on then to Chaz Bradfield, an ex-member of our panel from Winchester City Council. Chaz is Strategic Director at Winchester City. His career has spanned working in the NHS, in consultancy and for local government. At his heart, he's always been a focus on healthy people and communities. Town centre regeneration has been a passion for a number of years, in particular in Camberley, Basingstoke and Winchester, building partnerships with local businesses and leading large-scale regeneration schemes. Currently, Chaz is responsible for strategic leadership of a number of development projects in Winchester, including the £40 million leisure centre development at Bar End, the future of the old leisure centre site at River Park, Sir John Moore Barracks site, and the Central Winchester Regeneration Scheme. Over to you, Chaz.
Thanks very much. And I think it's interesting, isn't it, hearing other panelists? There is a lot going on, which I think gives us a great opportunity in Central South. And I'll just sort of whiz through a few highlights from the city centre point of view and a few reflections. I think just to put it in context, Winchester is a district council, a reasonable size one, but not huge. And our district spans from Basingstoke in the north down to sort of the edge of Portsmouth in the south. We have part of the national park in the district and a small medium-sized city in the middle from which we get our name. But it's really important in our work that we consider the whole place. And that, I think, is where some of our challenges come from. We usually come top in Great Place to Live polls or top 10, and we've got a real demographic challenge. So we've got a large amount of younger people, particularly in the city. We've got University of Southampton, University of Winchester based in the city, so strong demographics up to about 25. But then we've got a gap, and we are well below average for that sort of 25 to 40-year-old age group, and well above average for over 65s, and then that's going to carry on. So there's an interesting demographic challenge and what that means for our economy. Lots going on, as Tim said in introduction. I think we've had to adapt, haven't we all, in this period of time, and we're just consulting now on the Central Winchester Regeneration Scheme, which, as some of you will know, has gone through several iterations in its lifetime, as these things do. We're moving that forward, but we're having to do that in an entirely virtual way. So that's quite an interesting twist, and I think that's just something I'd just like to reflect on in COVID times, because clearly partnership is a theme of this conference too, partnership in regeneration. And one of the things on our mind has been how do we actually become more effective in that? It's very easy for citizen centres to be quite inward looking, and very easy actually for us to be sort of internally critical. Interesting hearing Bath, one of the commentaries saying there's not a great vision for the place. I've sort of heard people say that in Winchester, but actually, places have real great strengths, don't they? And I think there's a need for us to have confidence in the strengths of the place, in the strengths of the centres and the countryside in the Central South. We've been doing quite a lot of interesting strategy work at the moment that actually started before COVID, but has been given a bit of a push. So we've been looking in terms of responding to that challenge of there isn't a coherent vision for the place. Some work that was led for us by Boyle and Summers called One Great Win, and it was targeted on the city centre, but it was a sort of development of a city centre vision, our previous one having expired. But actually what's come out of that is really, places are almost like a living organism, aren't they? But the sort of people-based side of it is really important. And our people have been saying, actually, we're pretty clear on vision and direction. The problem here in Winchester is getting some action. So that's an interesting process, and it's just sort of at the end of the beginning. So we're watching that carefully to see how that develops. Like everywhere else, we're also thinking how does our economy respond to the COVID challenges, so doing some economic work. But I think what we've also tried to do as a result of COVID, some gaps that perhaps were there already got amplified. So our partnership working across the district has strengthened immensely as a result of that COVID experience, both in terms of the way our community responds to the challenge, but also we now have in our market towns a sort of multidisciplinary regular partnership meeting that wasn't there before. And we also have looked at that in the city centre. We have a business improvement district, very successful one, lots of stuff going on, but there was a real gap at senior decision maker level that we knew was there, but COVID sort of accelerated our work on that. And actually, we now have a much stronger city centre partnership. So, in response to the question that we were asked, what's city centre's future in 5 years? Do you know, I think that the personality is going to come out more. If you know what I mean. So not necessarily for decision makers to set a clear direction and be really, really clear about where it's going to be. But perhaps we need to be a little bit more collaborative, a little bit more encouraging evolution, because it's really difficult to, it's a little bit like trying to call the stock market, isn't it? It's really difficult to call the direction of travel here. So, I mean, I'd say perhaps leadership in collaborative spaces has gone. It's not so much the hero model anymore, the Churchillian, I'll sort it out for you. It's much more a collaborative partnership, distributed leadership. Local authorities clearly have the mandate to lead a place, but we can't do it on our own. So I think, and just to end, one of the things that's been going around in my mind is how do we do this? So I came up, as often in these cases, with four things, 4 O's I've called them. So I think we need to be organised, and particularly around bidding for money. So that's about being forward thinking, getting the bids organised. So when the money becomes available, we can get it. We do need to be outward looking, hence getting involved in things like Central South UK, and we need to shout more widely. We need to be opportunistic. So when the opportunity is there, we are able to grab it, and that's enabled by that being organised and being outward looking. And finally, we all know we've got to be optimistic. It's tough times, but if you're involved in economic and city centre regeneration, optimism is a key part of your DNA. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Chaz. And as you say, the importance of cooperation, collaboration is going to be really important with these initiatives going forward. If I can turn to our final panelist member, it's Debbie Tan, who is Chief Executive Officer of the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust. Debbie has a first-class BSc degree in environmental science and MSc with distinction in conservation from UCL, University College London. She began her career in the early 1990s as an ecologist, specialising in freshwater habitats, ponds and rivers. She's worked in a variety of roles within the Wildlife Trust, including Head of Conservation and Deputy CEO before becoming Chief Exec in 2008. Alongside her day job, Debbie has served on a number of committees, boards and advisory groups over the past 20 years, including 6 years on the South East Committee for the Heritage Lottery Fund, where she was the key expert advising on grants for natural heritage, and 3 years on the board of the Wessex Rivers Trust. In 2010-11, Debbie was seconded into DEFRA for 11 months to help write the Natural Environment White Paper, which put into government policy the groundbreaking recommendations of the Lawton Report, Making Space for Nature. Subsequently, she served for 2 years as the LMP representative on the DEFRA Local Delivery Group. If I can invite Debbie now to address us. Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you very much, and hello everybody. I'm just going to speak to you for a few minutes. I think a few reflections from me, having listened to all of the excellent speakers today, and just a bit about our vision for the future and how I absolutely agree with everybody's sentiments about collaboration and making this a fantastic place to live and work. For me, 2020, I should say, and the decade 2030 is such a turning point. Even before the pandemic struck, we were talking about the importance of putting nature into recovery and the importance of dealing with climate change. Because our environment is in actually quite a terrible state, that has a huge economic impact on our region and also the whole world. And so we were already starting to promote very ambitious plans for putting nature into recovery in 2019. When the pandemic struck in March and everybody went into lockdown, what was fascinating for us was that how many more people suddenly became very connected with the Wildlife Trust and connected with nature. We saw a 2,000% uptick in online engagement. Locally, and just in Hampshire, we've seen 150% growth in local engagement in our social media channels. We've seen growth in people connecting with the Wildlife Trust, and we've seen a quadrupling of people visiting our green spaces. And as many of you have said today, what the pandemic has really shown us is the importance of nature in our everyday well-being and that connection, and how important it is to support all of our well-being and our health. Now, lots of you have talked today about Hampshire's amazing natural assets and the Isle of Wight as well. And we have got some fabulous landscapes here. But what I would like to point out is that we mustn't be complacent. In fact, only half of our environmental assets are in good condition. Many of you will be familiar with the problems in the Solent, which is so polluted now with nitrates that it's put development on hold. We do have a solution though, and I'll come back to that shortly. Unfortunately, most of our rivers are in poor condition, and we've lost huge amounts of wildflower meadows and woodlands. So although we still have amazing assets in Hampshire, let's not be complacent. They're not in good condition and we don't have enough. The pace of economic growth and population growth has been quite stark over the last 50 years, and investment in the environment hasn't kept up. We haven't had any new national parks for a long time, country parks since the 1980s. And although we've got 2 amazing national parks, the investment in those national parks is not enough to really allow them to fulfil their full potential. So our proposition is that we bring into our vision for Hampshire, our vision for the Central South, real ambition for nature as well. Where's our vision for the natural environment? The stuff that Dan was talking about. You know, why not bring wilder cities to the fore? Why not reconnect some of those fragmented habitats? And also what I would like to propose is that we put nature-based solutions front and centre in all of our plans. Now, if we restore natural habitats, they can help clean up pollution. So our rewilding project that many of you will know about is helping to take nitrates out of the rivers and reduce the nitrate pollution problems in the Solent. That will unlock housing and create new nature reserves and new spaces for wildlife. If we do this, we can help prevent flooding and, crucially, we can capture carbon. Did you know that about a third of our efforts to decarbonise our economy can be met by nature-based solutions? So let's bring together all these opportunities to tackle climate change, reverse the decline in wildlife and biodiversity, create more green spaces for the public. Let's create wilder, greener cities, more nature reserves, and work with nature to solve some of these problems. We've set out a vision for a wilder Hampshire and Isle of Wight. We want to double the amount of land that we own and manage, and we want to work with all of the partners to deliver biodiversity net gain, greener towns and cities, and create lots of new habitats that will help really suck carbon out of the atmosphere, take pollution out of our waters, and help regenerate our soils and bring back our pollinators. It makes huge sense. The public are behind us, and the public want a green recovery, and they want to see nature absolutely at the heart of regeneration plans. So I think as the South, we have an opportunity to show massive leadership here. We've got the amazing partnerships, we've got the brains, we've got the connections, and we in the Wildlife Trust, we're one of the largest wildlife trusts in the UK. We are one of the most ambitious, and we've got some very exciting plans. So we're really keen to work with all of you to put nature back on the map, bring it right to the front of our ambition and what makes Hampshire and the Isle of Wight and the Central South such a great place to live. But let's not kid ourselves. We need to do quite a lot more work to really make wildlife come back. But it's all positive, and we are up for the challenge of working with all of you. So please get in touch with the Wildlife Trust. We want to play a role here. And as I say, we are growing, and it's the right thing to be doing. So thank you for inviting us today. I'm really happy to answer any questions, and our contact details are in the chat. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Debbie. Very articulate explanation of the importance of our natural assets and the need not to be complacent, as you say. If I can invite all of our panel speakers to put their cameras on now and answer any questions coming in. And I would urge members of our audience to put some questions forward for the panel to answer. I have a question for Philip. Philip, I've got a question from Mark Benham, Head of Real Estate at Leicester Aldridge. Bournemouth's roads and infrastructure are somewhat notorious, to say the least. There has even been talk of a monorail between the airport and the town centre as a solution. What does Philip believe could be done to improve the movement of people?
Yeah, thanks for that. We are one of the most congested urban areas in the country, which is a peculiar accolade. It actually helps in terms of attracting funding. It doesn't help if you're trying to get from one side of the area to the other. So it's a massive issue that we all appreciate has to be dealt with. A couple of things we're working on at the moment. A bit like Southampton, we've got a Transforming Cities Fund, which is pushing £100 million of government money in that first phase to try and transform the cities, clues in the title, of how we get around. And that's a particular focus on sustainable travel, so improving cycling and bus infrastructure, particularly getting from an east to west point of view, to be specific. So that's one part, and it's a chunky part of money that hopefully should make a difference. I think the other part, and actually it's quite topical, we took something through I'm taking something through council shortly, is about how we look at new residential developments and parking standards. So we're taking through a revised parking standards paper, which will reduce the need for any new developments in particularly our urban centres to have any parking whatsoever. And that's important from a number of reasons. First of all, it's already happening. So you take Bournemouth town city centre alone, I think the stats are about 50% of people that live in that area do not own a car already. So clearly there's already a need, not quite the need for parking and car usage as there once was. As we try and get more people to be living in our urban centres as well, that helps to improve the transport network in terms of sustainable travel, so that becomes a bit of a snowball effect. And then there's also the viability issue. Many that are on this call are involved in the development businesses I've been through all my life, and you will know that parking requirements severely affect the viability of new developments, which in turn affect the viability of bringing forward regeneration projects as well. So something simple like that, like looking at your parking policy for residential new developments, can hit a number of areas at once. It can help reduce congestion, it can help increase viability and increase the redevelopment in the town centres. But it's clear that this is an issue that we've all got to deal with nationally, particularly in the more urban centres. And I think one of the problems that we've got, unlike other city areas, is that we have become a city area almost by stealth, and many people don't even think we're a city area, even though we have a population that is bigger than Southampton and Portsmouth combined. And part of that is because we've got a number of different centres. So it makes it a bit harder. If you're a Birmingham or a Manchester, you've got a very defined centre, you can put a monorail and you can put a tram network that takes you straight to the centre. When you have a number of centres and a dense urban area that's quite spread out, it is a bit more tricky. But the Transforming Cities Fund will help, encouraging people into sustainable travel, and again trying to get more people living in those urban areas, which then frees the non-urban areas for people to still be able to use cars.
Great, thank you very much. And maybe the same question is also relevant to Kate and Chaz, actually, about mobility within your urban areas. Kate, did you want to say something about the transport initiatives in the city?
Sure, Tim. Absolutely. I mean, we also have the Transforming Cities infrastructure programme, and we're rolling that out as part of our medium-term investment. I think the infrastructure is absolutely key to our city growth and our recovery as well. And as I mentioned when I did my introduction around our connectivity, our water, our resource management and our utilities planning, and for this significant growth that we have coming forward. So it's a key partnership approach. We're working with a range of partnerships and also our commercial partner Balfour Beatty to roll that out jointly with Hampshire and as part of the solid transport work. It's clear that the city is a key employment and travel to work area as well, and we want to strengthen our connectivity to other parts of the region as well as part of that, Tim.
Thank you. And Chaz, obviously the Winchester city has got a lot of constrained areas in the city core with its historic interests, and park and ride around the outside. Have you got any initiatives in terms of movement for Winchester?
I think again, it's underpinning that collaborative approach. So we've been working for a while, and then and last year approved the movement strategy with the Hampshire County Council. So we're a two-tier area. So there's an intense need to work in partnership with the County Council, who are the Highways Authority. That's going really well, and again. I suppose it's building on Park and Ride. Park and Ride's worked really well for Winchester, and really quite interested in National Park City approach, because it could well be a walkable city. It's already pretty walkable. So we're trying to get essentially less traffic in the city centre, more into Park and Ride, and also make the Park and Ride a more sustainable, low carbon approach. We've been successful in attracting LEP funding for a larger Park and Ride car park opposite the new leisure centre. That'll be a multi-storey, and we'll also have a lot of PV and electric charging points in. But I suppose it also what I was talking about in what do our people want, movement, as probably in most cities, is a really strong voice from the people who live there. The movement isn't as good as we all want it to be. Cycling and walking are really more important. And I think also, we've had that great opportunity through COVID to mess around a little bit, haven't we? To break a bit of stuff, see how that works. And we've done some of that, led by the County Council. Some has worked really well. Some not so well, but that's how you learn. So I think it's a really interesting area of change at the moment.
Very good. And Debbie, just from a wildlife perspective, I was very interested in Dan's talk and the idea of slowways and sort of wildlife corridors. And how do you see that sort of fitting into this wider sort of strategy for movement?
I think it's absolutely critical, isn't it? People, especially people working from home more. I think during COVID, everyone was going out, getting their daily dose of nature every day. If we could bring, this concept of green cities, the 15-minute city is a concept that I absolutely love, where everything is kind of within, reach. We are looking to try and build, more wildlife in cities and more trees to absorb carbon, also clean the atmosphere, bring, habitats for pollinators and birds and things. All these things can be combined. Greenways, green grid can help cool cities. As we get warming climate, we're going to need to bring in more green space into cities to help cool them down. So I think we can have a really good integrated approach with walkways, green corridors, good local transport. And there's probably, really good economic potential to regenerate, town centres, because quite frankly, some of our town centres are a bit sad, aren't they? And they need, a real boost and something that's going to be more innovative and into town centres, something enjoyable. So, for me, this is all about combining what we need for nature, what we need for people, and what we need for the economy, and find these win-wins by working together. And, we've got some great data. There's important opportunities to map, look at where, people want to walk to and connect, but also how we can connect nature at the same time. So, we're really keen to work with cities. We're already starting to work with Portsmouth and Southampton on their Green City and Wild City initiatives. So this all links together for me. So great opportunities to do this sort of thing.
Great. Thank you very much. Just one final question for Rob. It's probably appropriate, actually, because I think you kicked off this session, Rob, with some inspiration from Bath. But as an architect, what impact do you think COVID is going to have on the way we design our homes and towns going forward?
I think, and it's something that we're finding already, that there's a lot more emphasis on private and public space. So I think not providing apartments without any form of outdoor space. So I think that's really changing now, that people are actually really interested in the quality of outdoor space. And I think, something we've done in previous developments is actually incorporating live-work units, which I think people were originally quite suspicious that they wouldn't be adopted, but they've been hugely successful. And I think that model of actually providing good quality space for working from home, not just at a desk, but actually running a small business, is going to be something much more common in the future.
Thank you, Rob. I'm just checking. I don't think we've got any more questions, so I think if we can wrap that up now in terms of the session. Again, very, very interesting discussion around those themes, the future of our town centres. So, in summary for today, I hope you've all enjoyed the presentations today as much as I have. Despite the unprecedented conditions that we've all faced this year, I believe there's a real sense of optimism of a green recovery for our town centres and wider economy, as long as we cherish our natural assets, as we've heard. Clearly, we have some major challenges ahead of us, but I've been greatly encouraged by today's presentations that there are solutions in the making to build on the work towards sharing a shared vision to ensure a successful future for the Central South region. And importantly, let's be more ambitious going forward and try not to be complacent, a message from John earlier on. I think finally, it's not been mentioned today, but certainly as a planner, I'd like to highlight that the new planning white paper, I think, provides an important opportunity to rethink our local plans, to provide a clearer and more succinct framework for investment decisions. Many existing local plans covering local authority areas make only passing references to the wider regional context, and many don't mention the regional economy at all. Going forward, the contribution that each local authority area, as we've heard today, has to make to the growth and future prosperity of the Central South should be a central pillar of its local plans. Similarly, the LEP economic recovery plans can also help to provide a joined up approach across the region. So in concluding today, first of all, I'd like to thank our sponsors again, Coffee Mew, Winchester City Council, White Young Green, Wilmot Dixon, Southampton City Council, and BCG. I'd also like to thank all of our speakers today, who have all provided an excellent contribution to today's session. So thank you again to all of our speakers. Thank you also to Lisa at Business South and Shirley in the Business South events team and BCG, who've been all behind the scenes today, but making sure the conference happened. And a big thank you to all of you for joining us today and taking the time to join us and contributing to our discussion. There will be 4 follow-up session workshops from today's virtual conference, and the first of these will be on the 15th of December, The Future of Digital Construction. To find out more about this event, please go to the website www.businesssouth.org. We will also be sharing a feedback link with you after today. And importantly, don't forget MIPIM in June 2021. A number of Business South champions will already registered to attend. And it's a great opportunity to shout about our region on an international stage. Finally, if you have time, please visit the Social Lounge and finish off this event with some networking. But thank you once again for joining us today, and we all hope to see you in person at our next conference in 2021. Thank you, everybody. Bye.